Every civilization on this list was thriving. Every one of them had survived for generations, and every single one was gone within a human lifetime. Some were buried, some were drowned, some collapsed under conditions that still don't have a clear explanation, and at least one was destroyed by something we're still not certain actually happened. Number 10. The Thera eruption. In 1967, archaeologists excavating the island of Santorini found something that stopped them cold. A city, completely intact, buildings still standing, furniture still in place, painted frescoes on the walls, showing dolphins and fishermen and spring flowers. The city of Akrotiri had been buried under volcanic ash for 3,500 years, preserved so completely that it looked less like a ruin and more like a place someone had simply walked away from, which, as it turned out, is exactly what happened. Around 1600 BCE, the volcanic island of Thera erupted with a force 4 times greater than Krakatoa. Ash spread across the eastern Mediterranean. Tsunamis demolished the coastlines of Crete, and it brought the effective end of the Minoan civilization, one of the most sophisticated cultures of the ancient world. The people of Akrotiri had warning. They got out. No bodies were found in the city, but the civilization they left behind didn't survive what came next. The waves, the ashfall, the collapse of trade networks they depended on. Plato, writing 900 years later, described a great island civilization that sank beneath the ocean in a single day and night. Scholars have been arguing about Atlantis for centuries. The answer may have been sitting under the ash of Santorini the whole time. Number 9. The Loggia disaster. The oldest noodles ever found were sitting in a bowl that had been flipped upside down. Someone was eating when the ground gave way. An earthquake struck the Loggia settlement in what is now northwestern China, and within minutes, a mudflow from the Yellow River buried the entire village. The bowl flipped. The noodles, made of millet, hand-pulled, were still intact after 4,000 years, preserved in the oxygen-free sediment underneath. When archaeologists excavated Loggia, they found 25 human skeletons in their final positions. A woman shielding a child with her body. A man turned towards someone he was trying to reach. People frozen in the moment between realizing what was happening and having any chance to escape. Loggia is called the Pompeii of the East. The comparison is accurate, with one difference. Pompeii has written accounts. We know what people saw, what they thought was happening, how long it took. Loggia has no such record. There are only the positions of the bodies, and whatever those positions mean, and a bowl of noodles that was never finished. Number 8. The Hameen manga epidemic. Archaeologists excavating a 5,000-year-old village in northeastern China found most of the site entirely normal. Houses, storage pits, pottery, evidence of a functioning agricultural community. Then they opened one room, 97 human skeletons, stacked in layers, most of them young, between 19 and 35 years old, almost no older individuals at all. The bones showed no sign of weapons, no signs of violence. The bodies had been piled in, the room had been set on fire, and the village had been abandoned. The interpretation that emerged was this: a disease moved through the settlement faster than the living could bury the dead. At some point, whoever was still standing put the bodies in a building, burned it, and left. They never came back. A nearly identical scene was found at Miaozigu, a separate village not far away. Same period, same victims, young adults, same outcome, 2 communities, destroyed by the same unnamed thing, within the same window of time. We don't know what the disease was. We don't know if anyone survived to carry the warning to the next settlement. We know what was left behind, and we know what it meant. And we know that nobody ever returned to rebuild. Number 7. The Cucuteni Tripilia burn. Every 60 to 80 years, the people of Cucuteni Tripilia burned their cities to the ground. Not accidentally, deliberately. The fires were lit from inside. The structures collapsed inward, and the settlements were either abandoned or rebuilt directly on the ash. This happened across hundreds of sites, over nearly 3,000 years, across what is now Romania, Moldova, and Ukraine. They were the largest civilization in Neolithic Europe. Their settlements housed up to 15,000 people, larger than the early cities of Mesopotamia. They had copper tools, sophisticated kilns, multi-story buildings, organized street layouts, and every few generations, they destroyed everything they had built and started again. Nobody knows why. Ritual, possibly. Agricultural, since the soil around a burned settlement would have been temporarily more fertile. Social, perhaps a way of marking generational change. of ensuring that no single family or lineage accumulated too much power across time. What is certain is this: by around 2700 BCE, the burning stopped, the settlements were abandoned for the last time, the people scattered, absorbed, most likely, into the incoming populations from the steppes, and a civilization that had sustained itself for nearly 3,000 years left behind no tombs, almost no human remains, and no explanation. They burned everything, including, apparently, every trace of who they were. Number 6. The Liangzhu Flood. The Liangzhu built the most advanced water management system in the ancient world, an interconnected network of over 130 dams, reservoirs, and canals, spread across a landscape that flooded regularly and required constant engineering to remain habitable. Their city covered 300 hectares. They produced more than 30,000 jade artifacts, the finest jade work of the ancient world, carved with a precision that archaeologists still find remarkable. They were, by any reasonable measure, one of the most sophisticated societies on Earth in 2500 BCE. Then the monsoon came. A study published in Science Advances in 2021 identified a brief, intense period of catastrophic rainfall around 4,300 years ago. The flooding was so severe that even the Liangzhu's elaborate dam network couldn't contain it. The city was inundated. The people fled and never came back. No evidence of warfare, no signs of disease, no slow decline. The Liangzhu were thriving, and then within decades they were gone, their dams buried under sediment, their jade workshops silent, their city lost until archaeologists stumbled onto it in 1936. Yu the Great, the legendary founder of the Xia dynasty, considered the first Chinese dynasty, was said to have controlled a great flood. It may not have been entirely legend. Number 5. The Bronze Age Collapse. The last known message from the city of Ugarit was found inside a kiln. It was a clay tablet, a letter from the king of Ugarit to the king of Alashia, written in urgent shorthand. Enemy ships had been spotted offshore. The city was under attack. Ugarit needed help immediately. The tablet was being fired in the kiln to preserve it for delivery when the city fell. It was never sent. Ugarit was destroyed around 1185 BCE and was never rebuilt. Between 1200 and 1150 BCE, the connected world of the Late Bronze Age collapsed. The Hittite Empire, which had rivaled Egypt for dominance of the Near East, was obliterated. Its capital, Hattusa, was burned and abandoned permanently. The Mycenaean palaces of Greece were destroyed one by one. Pylos, Tiryns, Mycenae, the writing system they used. Linear B disappeared. Greece entered a period of 400 years without writing. 3,200 years later, archaeologists still cannot agree on what caused it. Climate change, drought, internal rebellions, earthquake storms, and the mysterious sea peoples have all been proposed. The evidence points to all of them happening simultaneously. In 50 years, every major civilization in the Mediterranean world either collapsed or was critically weakened. The world that emerged from it looked nothing like the world that came before. Number 4. The 4.2 kilo-year event. 1 year without enough rain, then a second, then a decade, then a century. Around 2200 BCE, a climatic shift caused severe drought across a vast arc of the ancient world, the Middle East, the Indian subcontinent, the lower Yangtze Valley, North Africa. The evidence comes from lake sediment cores, cave stalagmites, and the dust layers found in ancient soil samples across multiple continents. The drought lasted, in various intensities, for roughly 200 years. In Egypt, the Old Kingdom, the civilization that built the Great Pyramids, collapsed. Inscriptions from the period describe famine and political chaos. In Mesopotamia, the Akkadian Empire, the first true empire in human history, founded by Sargon the Great, disintegrated. The Liangzhu, already weakened by flooding, did not recover. The Indus Valley civilization began its long decline. These were not small societies. These were the most powerful, most organized, most technologically advanced civilizations that had ever existed. None of them could survive 2 centuries without reliable rain. Some researchers argue the drought wasn't truly global, that the evidence is regional and the timeline inconsistent. That debate continues. What isn't disputed is that somewhere around 2200 BCE, everything changed at once. Number 3. The Toba supervolcano. Somewhere inside the DNA of every person alive today is the record of a near extinction. 74,000 years ago, The Toba volcano in Sumatra erupted with a force roughly 5,000 times greater than the Mount St. Helens eruption of 1980. It was the largest volcanic eruption in the last 2 million years. The ash cloud covered the entire Indian subcontinent in a layer roughly 10 centimeters deep. The sulfur dioxide released into the atmosphere triggered a volcanic winter estimated to have lasted 6 to 10 years, dropping global temperatures by 3 to 5 degrees Celsius. The genetic evidence is striking. Modern humans show an unusually low level of genetic diversity, far lower than our population size would suggest. This is the signature of a bottleneck, an event that reduced the human population to a small number of survivors, from whom everyone alive today descends. Some estimates place that number at fewer than 10,000 individuals. The timing aligns with Toba. The debate hasn't been resolved. Archaeological evidence from India suggests some populations survived in place, which complicates the bottleneck hypothesis. But the genetic data remains. Something happened 74,000 years ago that nearly ended the human story before it had properly begun. Toba is the leading candidate. Number 2. The Storegga tsunami. One morning, the North Sea floor moved. A section of the Norwegian continental shelf, an area roughly the size of Scotland, collapsed in a single underwater landslide, the Storegga slide, as geologists call it, displaced enough water to send tsunami waves racing across the North Sea at the speed of a jet aircraft. When those waves hit what remained of Doggerland, the inhabited landmass connecting Britain to continental Europe, they were between 20 and 25 meters high. Doggerland was already shrinking. Sea levels had been rising since the end of the last ice age, slowly consuming what had once been a landscape of rivers, forests, and marshes the size of Britain. Tens of thousands of people had lived there for thousands of years, hunted its plains, named its rivers, buried their dead in its soil. The tsunami didn't kill all of them, but within a few generations, even the survivors lost the memory of what had existed, the names of the rivers, the stories. All of it dissolved, until the only proof Doggerland had ever existed was the occasional tool dragged up from the seafloor by a fishing trawler, erased so completely it took 12,000 years and an accident to prove it had existed. Number 1. The Younger Dryas impact. Everything else on this list has a clear cause: a volcano, a flood, a drought, a disease. The evidence is there. The mechanism is understood. This one is different. Around 12,800 years ago, the climate of the entire planet changed within a human lifetime. Temperatures dropped 10 degrees in decades. The glaciers that had been retreating suddenly advanced again. A cooling period called the Younger Dryas began, and it lasted 1,200 years. It shouldn't have happened. Earth was warming. The Ice Age was ending. And then, without obvious reason, it reversed. In 2007, a group of researchers proposed an explanation. A fragmented comet struck the North American ice sheet, triggering catastrophic wildfires and destabilizing the climate. The evidence: nanodiamond particles, platinum deposits, microspherules, melted glass, appeared at sites across 4 continents, all dating to the same moment. The scientific community pushed back. Wikipedia currently describes the hypothesis as widely refuted, but in 2024, independent researchers published evidence from ocean sediment cores beneath Baffin Bay. In 2026, a separate team found the same impact markers in Patagonia, the opposite side of the planet. The debate is not settled. At the same moment the Younger Dryas began, the Clovis culture, the first widespread human culture in the Americas, vanished. The megafauna of North America: mammoth, mastodon, giant sloth, saber-toothed cat, gone, almost simultaneously. And 1,400 years later, Göbekli Tepe was built, already sophisticated, already organized, with no archaeological evidence of gradual development, which implies a tradition that existed somewhere before, carried forward through 1,200 years of cold by people we cannot find. If the impact hypothesis is correct, something existed before the Younger Dryas that left almost no trace, something erased by an event that also destroyed the evidence of its own existence. The disaster that covered its own tracks.